The Seattle Kraken are in a position to finish the homestand with 9 of a possible 12 points, which may mean the Seattle Kraken don't have to be so urgent at the trade deadline. But does that mean that they shouldn't do anything? We'll talk about that and get you ready for this afternoon's puck drop on this episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Erica Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. Excited to present to you a game day episode. The Seattle Kraken will host the Edmonton Oilers. It's going to be a huge matchup for the Seattle Kraken. Not only does it have playoff implications, but of course, it has trade deadline implications. Now, the Seattle Kraken have found a way to get some wins as of late after what we can only classify as a disappointing performance against the Minnesota Wild. I want to get you ready, though, for today's game against Edmonton first, and then we can break down a little bit of the conversation that we had the other day regarding, are we buyers or are we sellers? And why the next 4 games are pretty important. And we're going to go to some comments from Allison Lucan to help cement that point. But today is a game day. Happy game day, Seattle hockey fans. We're taking on the Edmonton Oilers. Now, this is coming off of a shutout performance from Philip Grubauer over the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, we've been talking a lot about Joey Daccord, and likely he's hit a little bit of a wall. But thankfully, Philip Grubauer has been playing well, and I'm thinking we'll see him in net against the Edmonton Oilers. There was no morning skate for today, and we'll hear from Dave Haxtell just about an hour and a half before the game tips off. The Oilers are 35-20-2. They are 5-4-1 in their last 10 games. Their road record 16-12-0. You can see the Seattle Kraken finally cracked. Well, I guess we had a little while ago, but we're still sitting low 60s in points, 26-22-11. Home record 14-10-5. So I like that the Seattle Kraken have started, at least this season, to defend the deep. And they're going to have to do so tonight. There's no question about it. This is a huge division rivalry. I talked a little bit about it the other episode, but the next handful of games, they're playing either divisional opponents or Western Conference opponents. And that means these are effectively must-win games as the Seattle Kraken want to climb in the standings for that wild card spot. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Connor McDavid, 94 points. McCann is leading us with 46. You can see the penalty kill here. Edmonton has the edge there, 79.5% clip, and we are at 78.9, the Seattle Kraken. The power play, 27.7 for the Oilers, and the Seattle Kraken at 21%. This is really going to be a chance for the Seattle Kraken to start putting the pieces together. I've talked on the most recent few shows about how there have been a lot of conversations that the Seattle Kraken have been having. There was, I should say, some consistency with the roster and the lineup, therefore. Unfortunately, that has kind of blown to the wind as, once again, Andrei Burakovsky is out with injury. And this doesn't seem to be something that's going to be long-term and nagging. It's just a challenge. We changed those forward lines. As I mentioned, my take on it is to activate Andrei Burakovsky and to quell perhaps also a little bit of the frustration that he's been feeling. And then he gets an injury. I want to be careful because I know I talk about this a lot. I don't think it's proper to quote unquote blame Andre Burakovsky. I mean, it's not like he's pounding beers in the middle of the ice and getting into, fights. That's not what I perceive to be the conversation. I've had conversations with people who cover the Seattle Kraken closely and saying that it's kind of his style of play and the way he plays the game that lead to the injuries. I'd have to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. Even if he does play a hard-nosed, aggressive style of hockey, I don't see that as a bad thing. I don't think we need to, well, some people might disagree, but I don't think we want him to play as though he's wrapped in bubble wrap. What is that? It's a baseball movie. Charlie Sheen is in it. What is it? Major League, right? Where the shortstop of all positions, shortstop or third, he plays on the left side. He kind of doesn't want to really get after it. It's like you can't play in that position as a shortstop, as a third baseman, and not play. You have to get your uniform dirty. And that's kind of how I feel about Andre Burakovsky. Is he a huge piece? Sure. Do I think we need to have him play like a lighter game just so he avoids injury? How does that help us? Anyway, I went on a little bit of a tangent there. Let me get back on track. But too long, didn't read, didn't listen. I'm not blaming Andre Burakovsky for his injuries. I would imagine that I'm frustrated just as Andre Burakovsky is about his injuries. And the reality of it is that this has to be something that the Seattle Kraken take into account, because my whole argument for the last year and a half has been the Seattle Kraken cannot put all their eggs in one basket, and it's been the Berkey basket recently, it seems like. But like I said, we're going to talk about maybe should the trade deadline or should the next 4 games directly impact trade deadline decisions, or should the Seattle Kraken be thinking beyond? And I think you kind of know my position on that, but we'll talk about it later on in the show. Okay, so about tonight's game. The Seattle Kraken need these 2 points. They need them. Now, we are not in striking distance of Edmonton. That's not what we're talking about here. If we look at the Pacific Division, Edmonton sitting at 72 points, we're at 63. The issue, though, is if we can keep Edmonton where they are, I mean, it doesn't directly impact us at the moment, but we just don't want to be losing out points. And we don't want to lose points to anyone in the Western Conference. I mean, anyone in the Western Conference. So if we were to get a win and keep Edmonton at 72 points, that would get us to 65 points without knowing what's happening anywhere else. Of course, that's not, we are not in isolation. There are other games, and we'll go over that a little bit later. But to get us to 65 points would leapfrog us into 5th place over Calgary, who's a team that's been really menacing in this part of the season. And we want to be able to get, in striking distance of Calgary. That would also, at the time, put us within 5 points of the LA Kings. But the Calgary Flames 4-game winning streak, the Anaheim Ducks a 2-game winning streak, and we're just ahead of them. Although I should say we're just ahead of them in the standings. The points speak. They tell a different story. But still, we don't want to lose points where Anaheim then is in striking distance of us, because that's just not a good, I mean, what are we? We're not, we can't be. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. I mean, if Anaheim is in striking distance of us and they're in 7th in the Pacific Division, what do you think that means for us regarding the playoffs? Okay, we're not in a, we have a chance, but it's not the same as it was last year. And we have to take some pretty big hacks. Okay. Then if we talk about the wild card, and I was going to talk about this later in the episode, but honestly, it makes a lot of sense just to harp on this point right now because we have to get this done. Right now, we sit in front of the Minnesota Wild. We're at 63 points. They have 62. We're right in line with St. Louis and Calgary, who I mentioned. So winning would leapfrog us ahead of both of them. And again, we'll go over the schedule, other games that we kind of need to watch. But that would put us right behind Nashville in the wild card. So it doesn't do much for us in the Pacific Division necessarily, but it could give us massive gains in the wild card hunt to get this win against Edmonton. LA Kings and the Nashville Predators both sitting at 70 points. We get 2 points outright tonight or this afternoon, and we are within 5 points of both of those teams. Now the Predators on a 7-game winning streak, So they are red hot. But if we can catch up with the Kings, and the only way we do that is by clustering together some wins, I like our chances. So that's the scenario. I know I really didn't talk much about this matchup, and it's not that Edmonton isn't important, but it kind of goes to what we've been saying. The Seattle Kraken have to do what they need to do. I've already talked about how I think it's going to be Philip Grubauer in net. I've already talked about how we might not have Andre Burakovsky. He's listed as day-to-day. Now, while that does impact the roster, I think it more so for me at this point has more of an impact on what we do, not just at the trade deadline, but in the off season. And of course, we talked about how much we need this win. I mean, we know what Edmonton can do. We know they are a scoring force. We know that they can get some great goaltending. We also know what the Seattle Kraken need to do to play their best game. Fun, fast, and forechecking. We talk most every day, Monday through Friday. So I'm not going to harp on those. I think the important point is that the Seattle Kraken know that they need this win. If you saw a Davy Jones hat giveaway after the Pens game, it went to Philip Grubauer for his shutout performance, 21st shutout in his career, if I remember correctly. And I can go to the notes, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. He said he focused immediately on today's game. The Seattle Kraken have to be focused. Fun, fast, forechecking. I love to hear that the fun seems to be coming back. And everyone really has to play their part. The Seattle Kraken play best when they play a team unit, which is also why, to go back to the Burakovsky point that I've been talking about, when you see someone on the edges of playing hero hockey, where they feel that or have decided that they must do maybe a little bit more than what is reasonable within the situation and scenario that they're in, that is not going to work for the Seattle Kraken team, especially when the hero hockey culprit is someone who's injury prone. I know that there are some Burakovsky fans that probably don't like how I've been talking about Andre Burakovsky. I have nothing against Andre Burakovsky. What I don't like is, again, that all of the Seattle Kraken eggs seem to be in the Berkey basket, and whether you want to blame him or not, which I do not blame Andre Burakovsky for his injuries. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not blaming Berkey. The job of the front office, though, is to assess what is real, what we see as our immediate history, and then chart a path that will get us to what we want our intermediate and long-term future to be. And putting all your eggs in the Berkey basket is a fool's errand. It just is. I'm sorry. I'm not saying we get rid of them. I'm saying that we need more offense. Even a healthy Burakovsky cannot anchor, no pun intended, cannot set our offense free in the way it needs to be. Okay, can we just agree on that? Maybe. Let me know in the comments. I will read the comments and I will respond to the comments, but we gotta move away from that, right? We've got to move away from it. Coming up next on Locked On Kraken, What does this all mean for the deadline? Do we even know yet? And we'll close out the show with why the next 4 games of this season are critically important. And I have to give stick taps to our Locked On Kraken insiders and our YouTube commenters who've been saying this now for a few days, for weeks. But now we're going to support that argument with some words from Allison Lucan on the Jeff Marek Show. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by Game Time. If you are an everydayer and an OGer, you know I love the Game Time app. I have it on my phone every time I travel, and I have some big travel coming up with the women's basketball NCAA tournament. I am going to be, you want to talk about the madness of March, and then early in April, I'm going to be checking on Game Time every single city that I go to. Right now, I'm set to go to Albany, and as a New Yorker who used to work in the nonprofit fields, I know a little bit about Albany, but I don't know what's going on in Albany around then. And then I get to go to Cleveland, Ohio. And so not from those areas, know a little bit more about Albany than Cleveland. But what I'm going to do is use the Game Time app to find maybe different performances. Springtime, early spring is a great time where you're starting to see new performances, more live shows, even sometimes, venues that are outdoor, and you can just have a good time. Concerts, theater, and of course, sports. So what I love about the Game Time app is when I'm in a place I don't know and I'm at a venue I've never been to before, I can get a view from the seats that I'm potentially looking to buy. And the Game Time guarantee means that if I find something somewhere else for the same event in the same section, in the same row for less, Game Time will give me 110% of that value back. But I'm not really going to look anywhere else because I like the lowest prices guaranteed on Game Time. So for our listeners, we want to let you know that if you download the Game Time app, you create an account, and you use promo code Locked On, you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account on the Game Time app and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. It's a game day. We are hosting the Edmonton Oilers. This is a big one for us. We talked about how the teams are faring right now. Edmonton in that 3rd spot in the Pacific Division behind Vancouver and the Vegas Golden Knights. They have 2 games that they've won consecutively, but again, 5-4-1 in their last 10. So we might be catching them on an upswing, just as something that we need to be conscious of, because I know our good friend Coach Hack doesn't necessarily believe that momentum carries from game to game. I've never believed that. Sorry, Dave. And just want to be mindful of that. The Edmonton Oilers are a plus 34. They know how to score. Okay. So we have to be mindful of that. But as I said, I don't want to really harp too much on the stats, because the fact of the matter is, if you're a Seattle Kraken fan, you want to know what the Seattle Kraken are going to do now that we are, 6 days away from the trade deadline. And the other day we talked about, are the Seattle Kraken buyers or are they sellers? And the answer right now, if we're just looking at this playoff situation, is that we don't know. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more substantially in the next segment. But we really don't know. And I've talked about it. Probably the last time I mentioned it explicitly was a few weeks ago. We remember last season when, right around the trade deadline, Ronnie Francis said his message to the team was, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance to really push for this. And I remember saying last season, how much of that was packaging something that was already going to happen, a decision that had already been made by our front office, but packaging it in a way that could be motivating. And if it was the latter, it was effective. Now, Now, are we going to see that same playbook here? Because to me, the situation is a lot tighter. And I guess what you could say is, if you want to say, I'm trusting you, I'm giving you the keys. That, to me, this season, that's a lot of trust to put into this team, because I've talked about consistency issues. Unfortunately, we've had injury issues. We have a goaltender who I think hopefully is coming out of just a fatigue, which is very natural from overuse. That's a lot of faith. I don't want to say the cynic in me, more of the realist. This is not a cakewalk for the Seattle Kraken. This is tough, and I think tougher than last year. But if Ron Francis wants to do that again, and it's again a decision that has already been made, and you just kind of package it in a way to fire up this team, get them ready to be a little more sandpaper gritty with how they approach every game, like must-win games like tonight, okay, I could get down with that. Except I would love to know how our front office is getting that same speech. Does that make sense? So we're motivating our roster, right? I'm going to trust you. I'm going to give you that faith. What conversation is being had from the front office and I guess the ownership team, the ownership group, to say, listen, we gave our head coach an extension. We gave our GM an extension, and we will trust your decision-making for this trade deadline. And we need to know what the process forward is. So, although if you're asking me, I think the trade deadline, because of where we are in the standings, it feels like we need to know whether we're buyers or sellers just for this season. And I think there's a truth to that. It's not that I think that's a false narrative or that's out of touch. There is an element to that where we have to have our eyes set on this season's playoffs. And I've said it before, that if the Seattle Kraken don't make the playoffs this year, this one's gonna sting. Not deep soul-crushing sting, but you have to start asking questions, because it feels like at points in the season we left stuff in the tank. We were too inconsistent, and our deficiencies showed because we had to be creative with the roster. I've always wanted to see us do more defensively. I think we've had questions about goaltending since season 1. And yet, the biggest change that we made on the goaltending side was to bring up Joey Daccord. I like that move. Unfortunately, again, somewhat because of injuries, we found ourselves, in my opinion, with Joey Daccord being in the same situation as Martin Jones last year, which is overworked. And why are our goalies overworked? This, honestly, I mean, I know I'm talking about Daccord and Jones, but this has been the plight of Grubauer since the beginning of his career with the Kraken. We overwork our goaltenders because we don't play sound defense. Now, I've been trying my best to not have that rely on any one or a group of defenders. But now I'm starting to wonder if maybe our defensive approach to the game needs to change. And is that a coaching change? I don't necessarily think Dave Haxtell is the problem, although the longer this becomes a problem, it is then his problem. He's the head coach. Heavy is the head. But what if the front office found ways to support Dave's vision and improve how we play defensively? So is that through a trade? Is that through a coaching change at the assistant level? What can our front office do to help us alleviate some of that pressure from goaltending and to get defensively sound? And yes, I do think a trade does that for you. So if the Seattle Kraken don't do anything at this trade deadline, I am not going to be satisfied, because it's not just this playoff push that we need to think about. We have to think about, if we make the playoffs, what is that even going to look like, right? Because there's the part where we have to make the playoffs. That's the immediate. Do we have what we need to even make the playoffs? Then when we make the playoffs in that scenario, do we have enough to at least get to a second round? And that's not a guarantee, so it's hard to measure that, really, I think. But do we have enough to get at least to where we were last year? There's so many variables, so many factors that might be a little unfair, but I think that's a question that's going to be asked of this Seattle Kraken team. And then there's the part for me that worries me the most. If we don't make a move this year, as much as you want to trust in this team, I have to believe that there is this team, including the coaching staff, that knows that there have to be improvements made. And at what point do you just need to make changes that are going to solidify that you are turning a corner? Yeah, they brought in Dumoulin, and I was at first not feeling it. And then I've come to understand and respect what Dumo is doing. I know a lot of people really like Borgen. I do like Borgen as well, but there's a part of his game that is undisciplined, and I haven't seen that we have. There's kind of like a love and a respect for how he plays the game. And it's not that I think how he plays is wrong. It's just that if we were doing the right things as a team, I don't think he would need to, or would feel that he needs to do some of what he's doing. And then there's Vince Dunn, who I've been critical of in the past. I think obviously we have him on board for offense, but he himself said he wants to work on his defensive side. I think we need a little bit more. We need continued growth from Vince Dunn. And I will attest that perhaps some of the up and downs that we've seen this season is because he's focusing on some of those things. I'd be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt there. And do we have enough people on the team that have the experience in the NHL being the kind of defenseman that Vince Dunn wants to be? I don't think we do. Sure. Solid defenders. I think of Larson. I've really started to respect and honor his game more. Justin Schultz for sure. And he did step up offensively for us in the playoffs. I want to see if we want Vince Dunn to be not necessarily offense first, but I can't speak. A dynamic offensive threat as a defender. I don't know that he's going to learn that from who we have on the roster. I don't think that there's enough support for that in how we have our systems set up. And the way that you improve that is, I guess, you could change the systems. You could change the personnel to get more expertise to run the system more to perfection. But I am leaning towards getting the right personnel, something like a veteran who can step in and show Vince Dunn what is possible and also help him reach his next level. That's what I'd like to see on the defensive side. And we don't have that right now. Our fourth line, we made some changes. They haven't worked out, in my opinion. So we need to find that sweet spot again of getting productivity from our quote unquote bottom six forwards, and not having to rely on our quote unquote bottom six, third and fourth line forwards, so that it's a little bit more of a seamless transition line to line to line. The last two seasons, this one and last year, we've really relied on that third line and that fourth line to run the engine and then get lines 1 and 2 to settle in. Some of that may be because of injury. But again, if these are the pieces that we have at forward, what's the right combination, the right 1, 2, 3, 4 punch to not only be able to keep up with other teams, but more so to set the pace that's going to work for how the Seattle Kraken play? I don't know that we have answers to any of those questions. So for me, to say that we're not going to do anything at the trade deadline doesn't make sense to me. Because I think there are things we can do at the trade deadline to set us up to have a better offseason and offseason moves. That's tough. The Seattle Kraken are in a very tough position because are we buyers? Are we sellers? If you're looking only at this season, you can say one thing. If you're looking at the trajectory of the Seattle Kraken comparative to last season, you might say something else. If you're looking at the Seattle Kraken with those two things and what we're going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years, that also could be a completely different scenario. I'm leaning towards looking at the 3 to 5 year plan and not just the immediate. So are we buyers? Are we sellers? I don't even know I don't even know that either one of those categories exist. Perhaps what I think I want to say is that we have to be active. We have to be active. And so coming up next on this episode, what does Allison Lucan think? Are there names that she's mentioning that we haven't mentioned here? And again, why are the next 4 games critically important for the Seattle Kraken? That's coming up on today's show. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at Sleeper. We know it is well beyond the halfway point and it is almost trade deadline, folks. So the Seattle Kraken have had an interesting road. We've had our ups, we've had our downs, but hey, I'm enjoying Kraken hockey all the same. And regardless of where we are in the current standings, which I will mention again before we close out today's episode, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Now, you can find Sleeper for the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, college football, and of course, hockey. I don't remember if I said hockey. That's why I paused a little. I think I meant to say NFL, but maybe said NHL. The point is, there's multiple leagues where you can use Sleeper. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Philip Grubauer, Justin Schultz, or even Brian Dumoulin will record more or less than their Sleeper projections on things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game. To 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me right, Kraken fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks to start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply, but that's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. 4-game season. Why the next 4 are so important? That's coming up. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here with you on a Saturday, on a game day, to talk about your favorite hockey team, the Seattle Kraken, taking on the Edmonton Oilers today in what is part 1 of a 4-game series that is going to be critical for the Seattle Kraken. We take on Edmonton today to close out the homestand. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the Seattle Kraken in position to take 9 of a possible 12 points on this road trip. We lost out on 2 points outright in that really troubling loss to Minnesota. Then we hit the road. We have 2 games and they're back-to-back, mind you. So we're going to see Joey Daccord soon one way or another. I would imagine maybe for that Winnipeg game, for the first one on the road. That's just my gut, but who knows? So we take on Edmonton today. Then we hit the road Monday, Tuesday, Calgary, and Winnipeg. Now the Calgary game in particular critical, because not only can we win games to our efforts for the wild card, but we can drop Calgary down a few points. So that's really a critical one. But then, of course, taking on the Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Jets are right now tied with the Colorado Avalanche in the Western Conference at the top of the table. The Dallas Stars have 81 points outright and are leading the charge, but you see how close that one is. But if Winnipeg here, now this is an interesting one, right? Because Winnipeg dropping down impacts the wild card. Now, so you got to get the points. It's a little bit, I mean, I would have preferred to play Calgary twice in this stretch, especially right before the trade deadline, than Winnipeg. But what can we do? What can we do? I'm sorry. I need a little swig of my energy drink. What can we do? We have to win those games. It's just like, Winnipeg, because again, should Winnipeg drop for any reason outside of the top 3 within that stretch, then now we're jockeying in position for them, and they would boot everyone down effectively. Anyway, this next 4 games, and shout out to Striatic, who's really been saying this for a while, but these 4 games, according to Allison Lucan, who joined Jeff Marek on the Sportsnet 590, The Fan, WFAN, that's what we used to say in New York. Anyway, she's saying that it's really these next 4 games that will determine if the Seattle Kraken are buyers or sellers. Now, I kind of told you, I think that's not the question. I think we have to be active, period. I've been saying this for a year and a half, every day as OGers, you know. I want to see us get active. It's time. We can't just rest on our Berkey basket. Anyway, now, the names that Allison brought up, should the Seattle Kraken look to be sellers, are the same names that we've been talking about. She talked a lot about Alex Wenberg. She talked about Justin Schultz, and even, Eberle as well. I'd like to see Eberle stay. I've talked about what I've heard from other people who I know are around the Seattle Kraken and covering the Seattle Kraken regarding Alex Wenberg. I'm okay to find a different home for Alex Wenberg. I do think it's interesting, though, if you listen to the segment, what Allison says about Alex Wenberg and why he would have trade value. So that's interesting, but I don't know that Wenberg is in the long-term plans for the Seattle Kraken. Justin Schultz, we've talked about this. I really like Justin Schultz. I know that he takes some penalties. They kind of go 50-50, at least for the eye test for me. I think he takes a lot of what I would consider pro fouls or pro penalties, and those are situational. And then there are times where it's like, stick penalties, as Coach Hack says, that are just like, come on, if you move your feet, if you're in the right position, we don't need to take that penalty. I like that he brings a veteran presence. And if he has trade value, which I think is why we have seen Riker Evans be a healthy scratch for so long, and I kind of talked about that the other day, I think the writing might be on the wall. So while I think, are we buyers or sellers? I don't really know what the answer is there. I don't know that the Seattle Kraken know the answer there. And Allison saying that they might not know until this 4-game stretch, which, just so you know, that second Winnipeg game is actually on March 8th. So really it's the next 3 games. Well, I guess this segment they talked before the Pittsburgh game. So that, anyway, the point is the next 3 games, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, are going to be critical for the immediate timeline for the Seattle Kraken. The intermediate timeline for me extends through the offseason. And I think if we don't move for whatever reason, some of those pieces, and we do want to be buyers, I still think some of those pieces we have to think about for the offseason. So it's an interesting time. I do not envy the front office. Again, the Q&A that Allison has with Ricky Olczyk, I think is something that I'm going to be reading a few times over for the next few days just to wrap my head around it, because I'm not, as far as my hockey analysis, I love defensive analysis, but trade deadline stuff is pretty intense, and it's a speciality that I do not have a passion for. So I definitely leave that to more experts. That being said, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to having a long-term plan, I'd like to think that I have a pretty solid finger on the pulse for the Seattle Kraken. And this is going to be a critical time for them, not just because of this playoff run. And I really want to emphasize that. That might be my massive takeaway that I want to harp and impart on you, leave you with before tonight's game against the Edmonton Oilers. I don't think, GMs never just look at one thing, but the most important thing, I know it might sound silly to say, the most important thing might not be this trade deadline or even this playoff run. The most important thing is that the Seattle Kraken remain active between now and the start of next season. Because if we are not, then I don't understand. I don't have a comprehension for what the long-term plan is, nor whether the Seattle Kraken have a strong hold on what that is. And there is nothing that I know about this team that makes me think that they don't have an understanding of what they want the future to be, which leads me to assume that whether we're buyers or sellers, the Seattle Kraken are going to be and must be active. So will we have to say goodbye to some favorites? Maybe. I think maybe we got a little bit wrapped up in last year's run. I would have liked to see some of those pieces stay. Look at what Geeky's been able to do with Boston. I'm always going to hold it down for Ryan Donato. And I don't know. We kind of need a fourth line center right now. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare had a very long injury, and his leadership, great, loved it, but it wasn't enough. Just like Berkey hasn't been enough. So I don't know. Anyway, let's wrap this one up. You've got a game day to get ready for. I've got some other things going on here in Tulsa. And as you might be able to tell, the sun is shining. So I'm going to enjoy that. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. And if you are going to CPA, and certainly I hope you're watching the game, you know what to do. Hold fast, stay true, and loud and proud we say, let's go Kraken. I will catch you on the next episode, which I am expecting will be Sunday, tomorrow, to recap this game and where we stand in the next 3 games and the importance of the next 3 games right ahead of this year's trade deadline. Be well, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace.